Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka Trump, was on the stand today in the former president's civil fraud trial in New York. She didn't want to appear, but the court said she had to. Ivanka Trump testified today that she had no role in her father's personal financial statements, and she distanced herself from knowing anything about a discrepancy in the value of a penthouse apartment in one of her father's Manhattan buildings that she leased. She did say upon cross-examination that banks were happy to loan money to the Trump organization. New York's Attorney General alleges Donald Trump's asset values were fraudulently pumped up for years to help him get loans and insurance. Ivanka was the fourth Trump to testify in the past 2 weeks. For a closer look at this hearing, I want to welcome retired U.S. District Court Judge Shira A. Shendlin. And Judge Shendlin, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Most welcome.
So Ivanka Trump and her counsel made a few bids to not testify today. One was to testify from Florida, but overall, what would a judge make of that reluctance to testify?
I don't think a judge would draw any inference from that. There are a lot of people who don't want to become a witness at trial. That's not unusual. But when compelled to do so, she came, she testified. So I don't think a judge would draw any negative inference because she preferred not to be there and tried hard not to be there, but she did come and she did testify.
And so, Judge, just overall, what did you make of Ivanka Trump's testimony today?
Well, of course, I didn't hear all of the testimony. I was not in the courtroom, but from what I understand occurred, there's no surprises there. Like the other Trump family members, she denied any responsibility, any knowledge. I didn't have a role in those statements. That was up to the inside accountants, the outside accountants. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a financial person. None of this was unexpected. She basically made the point that she had nothing to do with it, and she implicitly says neither did the other family members. She does say, however, that the banks, as you pointed out, were happy to lend, did lend, were happy to do business with Donald Trump. And as Donald Trump testified, the banks were largely repaid on those loans. And he says there's no damages. They weren't hurt. All the loans were repaid, and they were happy to do business with me. That's his defense. He also says there was a disclaimer at the bottom of each financial statement that the statement may not be 100% accurate. So it was there. He's relied on that over and over again. And that's his view of this prosecution.
Today's testimony is certainly not as theatrical, if we can use that word, as Monday's when the former president testified. How easy or how hard is it for judges to, keep their cool in circumstances like that, having a former president on the stand?
Well, that's, of course, a unique situation. I never had a former president in my courtroom, but I did have some very high-profile witnesses over my many years on the bench. And it is the judge's job to try to remain as cool as possible, not to engage in a debate with the witness, not to fight with the witness, not to lose one's temper. Most importantly, not to say something that the judge will then regret that becomes part of the record on appeal. So the judge's job is to sort of sit on their hands and not get excited, not bang things, not throw things, not shout, not threaten, but just try the case as calmly as possible. And it's not always easy to do. I think that the former president in particular is very good at goading people and trying to get them to say something they'll regret or to act in a way that they'll regret. So when he points his finger at Letitia James and says, "You're the fraud," or he points his finger at the judge and said, "You didn't know me, you ruled against me," that's when he's trying to get you to do something that you don't want to do.
And so do you think the judge succeeded in staying cool?
In the first part of that morning, till about 11 a.m., I think he let himself get drawn in. He let himself really fight with the former president and, demand that he answer the question and demand that he not go off script. And that guy's a hard guy to corral, so to speak, too. He doesn't listen to his lawyers. He doesn't listen to the judge. Everybody who knows Donald Trump, and a lot of judges in New York have had him in the courtroom over many years. That's the way he is. He's hard to control. So I thought the judge got a little bit excited in the morning and raised his voice and was red in the face and all the things I read about. But I think after the morning break, I think it was around 11 o'clock, when he came back, he seemed more passive, more willing to let the witness just talk himself into a hole, which is exactly what Donald Trump did. It turned out that the Assistant Attorney General was quite happy to let him keep talking, because the more he talked, the more he helped make the case for the state. So I think the judge pulled back at that point and let him have free rein and let him talk.
So this is, as we mentioned, a civil trial, judge alone, but there will be criminal trials involving Donald Trump next year, imagine in a presidential election year. How do you think the tenor of those hearings will be different from this?
Very different, because the civil trial is not only a judge trial, but it's civil. The trials coming up are criminal trials and they're jury trials. So first of all, at a jury trial, he doesn't have to testify at all. He has a right to remain silent. He has a Fifth Amendment privilege, we call it, not to say anything, and certainly not to incriminate himself. So he may not testify, but knowing Donald Trump, no matter how many times his lawyers tell him, don't testify, it's dangerous, he may override them and insist on testifying. If he testifies, he can't selectively invoke the Fifth Amendment. Once he starts to answer questions from his own lawyers, he can be cross-examined by the government lawyers in response. So if he decides to testify, then he can testify. He has to testify about everything that will come up. So that'll be really interesting to watch, whether he insists on testifying or whether he remains silent, which is probably the better strategy. But I bet this guy doesn't listen to his lawyers.
Judge, it's been really interesting to get your insight into all of this today. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
That was retired District Judge Shira Shendlin.